Welcome to Sravz technical series. This is the session 4 of the historical ticker plant implementation in Rust. In the previous 3 sessions, we discussed various parts of the code base. In today's session, which is the session 4, we will discuss the config struct and the usage of config struct in the main, router, and services. We need a configuration structure because we have a bunch of environment variables. So we'll read those environment variables and save it in a config struct. And at a later point, we might also implement config.toml or JSON file in which we'll have a static configuration, and we'll read the configuration from those files into the config struct. And then that would be our configuration for the whole application. So the config struct will be read in the main, then the main will clone it and then pass it to the router, and the router will clone it again and then it will pass it to the services. Since it's a Rust-based implementation, we have to implement clone of the structure. So we'll discuss that in a bit. Also, in today's session, we'll discuss the NSQ messages being sent on the backend-node topic, from where the UI will see the messages. So in session 2 of the data flow diagram, we discussed the eye-level architecture, where we'll have NSQ as the messaging queue, and the message will be sent in backend node topic, which will be picked by the Node.js server and then displayed in the UI. So in today's session, we'll see that the messages are available in the NSQ, and Node.js has to just pick them up and display in the UI. We'll do the UI portion in a later video. For today, we'll see that the messages are being sent by the ticker plant over the NSQ message, and they are ready for the Node.js to pick up. I'll switch to the Visual Studio Code. So this is the code base. I have the NSQ tail running, so I'll cancel it out and open it again. So we have NSQ tail listening on training-node topic. So we have the messages so it is running in the background. I'll go back to the Rust screen. So it's running here. The Rust application is running in the background, and it is pumping in the messages to the backend node. I'll just send another test message. So I sent a test message to training Rust, and the test message is in this format, which we discussed previously. So the message is requesting for the leveraged funds analysis on these 3 ETFs. So the Rust application is processing that message like that, and then it is sending that to the backend node topic. So I see the messages here. So the output would be a URL like this, from where we'll have the tier sheet. So if I open, we should be able to see it. It downloads the URL. It's a JPEG, so it's a PNG file. So if I open the PNG file, so the PNG file would look like this: leveraged funds. I'll zoom it in. So this is the leveraged funds analysis for those 3 tickers: QQQ, QLD, and TQQ. We have the tier sheet coming out, and we have the daily returns, then the cumulative returns, etc. Also the daily returns factor, daily return beta, slippage, etc. So we'll discuss this in a later session. So now we see that the historical ticker plant is able to process the data frames, generate this tier sheet, and it sends it out on the NSQ message. So I'll go back to the code base. I'll open the code in Git graph in VS Code. We have the config.rs, which I mentioned is a new file. So config.rs is a new file which has the configuration we need. So it's a struct which implements debug, and debug is so that we can print it out, and then we need a clone implemented. The default clone is sufficient because these are all primitive types. We need a clone because we will be cloning this struct when we pass it from main to router to services. And then it's just an AppConfig struct with bunch of variables in it. It reads off of the environment variables and saves them to these variables: the NSQ host, lookup the hosts, Mongo URI, Contabo bucket key, and the Contabo object URL prefix. It's the way Contabo, these are Contabo specific environment variables. We can skip that. Now main.rs. In main.rs, we import use the AppConfig struct. Then we create the AppConfig instance, new instance, and then if it is able to be if it is created, we save it to config. Then MongoDB URI, if you recall, we have hard coded before, but now we create a new instance of AppConfig. If it's created, we save it to config variable. Then to the MongoDB client, we pass the config variables attribute, Mongo lab URI, which is a string. So we clone it and we pass that. Also, for the lookup the addresses, before we were using hard-coded list of addresses like this, but now we pass the comma-separated list of NSQD hosts, and then we use those. Similarly, for NSQD hosts, these are lookup the addresses. We split the addresses at a comma separated list of addresses which are passed as environment variable, and we use those. Here again, it's a comma separated list, and then we use that instead of hard coding the host names. And then to the router, we pass a clone of the config. So that's why we had to implement clone for the config struct. And these are some other cleanup I did, so that when the message is generated, the message will be saved to MongoDB, and then it will be sent on the producer topic. So that's all the changes we made. We'll discuss this NSQ specific implementation at a later point. Right now, NSQ message, the NSQ server keeps sending the Rust ticker plan, the same message over and over. So we have to see why the ACK doesn't work. So I'll do that in a separate video. So that is the main. Then in the router, we added the config, which is passed from the main. And the router will also pass config to the leveraged funds service, so that the services can use it. So this way we have a config created in the main, which is cloned and sent to the router. Router acts as the dependency injection system, and then it will pass the config to the services. Then we have leveraged fund service.rs, which will now receive the config as one of the parameters, and then in the config we'll use the config variables to save the PNG file to the Contabo. So that's why we needed those variables in the config. And if you recall, we were able to download it from the Contabo, this PNG file. So this PNG file in Contabo is saved using the logic here. We update in the message, we update the location of the leverage funds .png, which we send it back to the client here. So the client would get that message. So the client will get the message here. I'll cancel out of the tail. So this is the message we generate, the signed URL. The signed URL will have leveraged funds underscore PNG, and then we can get so in a future session, we'll use this data which we get over NSQ, parse it in Node.js server, and then the Node.js server will send over WebSockets to the client. Then the client can get this message from this JSON payload. So I'll go back to the documentation page. So this is all we discussed, and I'll upload the video. With that, I'll close today's session. If you have any questions or comments, please reach me out in the discussion tab here or in the YouTube channel. Thank you.